The millionaire turned his back on the janitor, dismissing him without a second thought, only to be shocked later when he found his mother's cherished wedding ring in his own pocket. It was a morning like any other in the sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the pristine marble floors and priceless artwork that adorned the walls. The millionaire sat in his study, a fortress of solitude within his lavish home. Surrounded by luxury, he felt an emptiness that no amount of wealth seemed able to fill. The air was thick with silence, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside or the faint hum of distant traffic. But within these walls there was no sound of laughter or love, only cold, hollow echoes. The millionaire, once a man of ambition and drive, now lived in emotional isolation. His wealth, amassed over decades of shrewd business deals and calculated risks, had brought him everything he thought he wanted: cars, houses, and status. Yet as he sat there alone, his mind wandered back to a time before the money, before the power, to a time when his mother's soft voice had filled this very house with warmth, and her laughter had been the music of his childhood. She was gone now, and with her departure, any sense of joy had evaporated from his life. His only remaining connection to her was a delicate wedding ring, her most treasured possession. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of love, of family, of everything he had lost in his relentless pursuit of success. But today that ring was missing. Enter the janitor. An unremarkable figure in the grand scheme of the mansion's daily operations, he was a man of few words. Always present but never seen, his duties involved the menial tasks that kept the millionaire's life in perfect order: mopping floors, polishing the extravagant fixtures, and ensuring the estate remained spotless. To the millionaire, the janitor was invisible, a part of the background, as insignificant as the dust he cleaned. He had never stopped to consider the man behind the uniform, nor had he ever bothered to learn his name. But on this particular morning, things took an unexpected turn. The millionaire, already in a foul mood from a series of stressful business calls, crossed paths with the janitor in the hallway. Tension filled the air, as if the mansion itself sensed the brewing conflict. A minor mistake on the janitor's part, a misplaced item, or perhaps a scuff mark on the polished floor, was all it took to set the millionaire off. Without hesitation, he unleashed a torrent of insults, his words dripping with arrogance and entitlement. "You're fired," he spat, his voice cold and final. "Pack your things and leave immediately. I don't want to see your face in this house again." The janitor, caught off guard, looked up in stunned silence. His eyes betrayed no anger, no resentment, only a quiet resignation, as if he had long since accepted the unfairness of the world. With a nod, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the weight of a life spent in the shadows. As the millionaire stormed off, his thoughts quickly shifted back to his own concerns. But later that evening, when he reached for the ring, the one thing that brought him solace in his loneliest moments, his heart sank. The small velvet box that had always sat on his desk was empty. Panic set in. The ring wasn't just a sentimental trinket, it was a lifeline to his mother's memory, the one thing that connected him to a simpler, happier time. He tore the room apart in a desperate search, but the ring was nowhere to be found. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. A sinking feeling began to take hold. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had he misplaced it? Could it have been stolen? And then, a troubling thought crept in. What if the janitor had taken it? After all, the man had just been humiliated and cast out without a second thought. What better motive for revenge? The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest as he considered the possibility. Could he have overlooked the janitor all this time, only to be betrayed in the end? It seemed unthinkable, and yet the ring was gone. The mystery was just beginning to unfold, and the tension in the house, once an impersonal void, now felt thick with an unsettling sense of loss. The millionaire, for all his wealth and power, was facing something he couldn't control, something that money couldn't solve. As night fell, he sat in the darkened study, his hands trembling. The mansion, usually so full of lifeless luxury, now felt like a cage. The missing ring was more than just an item. It was a reminder of everything he had lost in his pursuit of wealth. And, as the weight of that realization settled in, He couldn't shake the feeling that the janitor knew something more than he had let on. As the days passed, the millionaire's frustration only grew. Despite the house staff scouring every corner of the mansion, the ring remained missing. The absence of that small object had thrown his world into disarray. But it was more than just the loss of the ring. It had stirred something deeper within him. The memories of his mother, long buried beneath layers of wealth and success, began to resurface, unbidden and relentless. In the quiet moments between business meetings and shallow conversations with his associates, he found himself drifting back to the last time he had seen her. He remembered her soft smile as she held his hand, the ring glinting on her finger. It had been her wedding ring, a symbol of the love she had shared with his father, a love that had once filled their home with warmth and laughter. She had passed it down to him before she died, entrusting him with more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a legacy, a reminder of the values she had lived by: love, kindness, and humility. But he had forgotten. Over the years, as his wealth grew and his heart hardened, he had let go of those values. Now, sitting alone in his grand, empty mansion, the weight of that realization pressed heavily on his chest. His success had come at a cost. His relationships, his humanity, his connection to the people who had once mattered most. And then, there was the janitor. Since the day he had fired him, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a grave mistake. The man had seemed so quiet, so insignificant, and yet, there was something in his eyes that lingered in the millionaire's mind, a depth that he had never bothered to notice before. Was it possible that the janitor had known his mother? Could there have been a connection between them that he had been too blind to see? Late one night, while rummaging through his mother's old belongings, he came across a small, faded envelope. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized his mother's delicate handwriting on the front. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside was a short note, written just before her death. "My dearest, I know you will one day find your way back to what truly matters. The ring I gave you is not just a token of my love, but a reminder to always hold on to the goodness in your heart. No matter how far you stray, it's never too late to return." The millionaire sat back, the note clutched tightly in his hands. His mother had always been wise, seeing things in him that he had never seen in himself. She had known that he would lose his way. But what had she meant by return? To what? To who? The ring suddenly felt like more than just a symbol of her memory. It was a key, a path back to something he had lost. And then it hit him. The janitor. Could he have been the one who held the answer all along? With renewed urgency, the millionaire began to dig deeper. He contacted the house staff, asking about the janitor's background, his history. At first, there seemed to be nothing remarkable about the man. He had worked quietly in the mansion for years. Always reliable, never causing any trouble. But as the millionaire pressed for more information, small details began to emerge. One of the older maids mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she had seen the janitor speaking with the millionaire's mother a few times in the months before she passed. Nothing unusual, she had thought, just casual conversations in passing. But the more the millionaire asked, the more it became clear that his mother and the janitor had shared something deeper. They had spent time together, often in the quiet corners of the mansion where no one else went. His mother had even mentioned the janitor's name once or twice in her final days, though the millionaire had been too preoccupied to pay attention. Now that oversight haunted him. How could he have been so blind? His mother had known something important, and he had dismissed it without a second thought. Determined to find the truth, the millionaire set out to locate the janitor. He had disappeared without a word after being fired, leaving no trace behind. But the millionaire's wealth afforded him resources, and it wasn't long before he found a lead. The janitor had moved to a small, rundown apartment on the edge of town, far from the opulence of the mansion. The millionaire hesitated for a moment before leaving his car, unsure of how to approach the man he had wronged. The anger and pride that had once fueled him seemed distant now, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt and uncertainty. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door finally opened, the janitor stood before him, a look of quiet surprise on his face. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a calm, steady gaze that seemed to pierce right through the millionaire's bravado. "I came to talk," the millionaire said, his voice softer than he had expected. "I think we both know why." The janitor didn't say a word. He simply stepped aside, allowing the millionaire to enter. As they sat down in the small, modest living room, the millionaire found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain what had brought him here? How could he express the weight of everything he had come to realize? "I lost something," the millionaire finally said, breaking the silence. "Something important. And I think you know what I'm talking about." The janitor remained silent, watching him carefully. It was then that the millionaire noticed something glinting on the table beside them, a small object, half hidden beneath a stack of papers. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. The ring. Before he could speak, the janitor finally broke his silence. "Your mother gave this to me," he said quietly, his voice steady and calm. "She asked me to keep it safe until you were ready to understand why." The room seemed to close in around the millionaire as the janitor's words sank in. His mother had trusted this man, a man he had dismissed as insignificant with the most precious thing in her life, and she had known, even then, that he wasn't ready to truly appreciate it. He had been blind, lost in his own world of wealth and success, while the real treasure, the connection to his mother, the values she had tried to instill in him, had been right in front of him all along. Now, it was up to him to find his way back. The mystery deepened, and the millionaire realized that the journey to understanding had only just begun. The silence between the millionaire and the janitor grew heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken truths. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt something crack within him. All the layers of arrogance, pride, and emotional distance that had defined his life began to crumble. The ring, the very thing he had sought, sat there on the table, yet it now seemed to represent more than just a material loss. It was a mirror, reflecting back at him all that he had become and all that he had lost in the process. He sat there, struggling to find the words. His throat felt tight, as if the weight of his own guilt was suffocating him. "I don't understand," he finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why would she give it to you?" The janitor looked at him calmly, his eyes filled not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. "Your mother knew you were drifting long before you did," he said, his voice steady and measured. "She saw the changes in you, how the world you were building around yourself was pushing you further from the things that really mattered. She wanted to give you time, a chance to come back to yourself, but she feared that time would never come." The millionaire sat back, the words hitting him harder than any insult or rebuke ever could. His mother had seen him lose his way. She had watched him transform from the boy who once held her hand so gently into a man whose only love was power and wealth. The thought of her witnessing his decline filled him with a deep, aching shame. "She gave me the ring," the janitor continued, "because she believed I would protect it. She trusted me to give it back to you, but only when I thought you were ready to receive it. Not just as a piece of jewelry, but as a reminder of what it stood for." The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest. Ready? He had never imagined that he wasn't ready to own the ring, to carry its legacy. After all, it was just an object. A symbol, yes, but still something that belonged to him. Or so he thought. Now, sitting in this modest apartment, far from the luxuries of his mansion, he realized how wrong he had been. The ring represented more than just his mother's memory. It was a bond, a link to the values she had lived by and hoped he would one day return to. But had he returned? Was he even capable of understanding what she wanted for him? The janitor's calm presence only intensified the millionaire's inner turmoil. For years, the janitor had worked in his home, unseen and unnoticed, while silently holding the key to the one thing that truly mattered to him. And it wasn't just the ring, it was the understanding of who he had become and what he had lost. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the walls of the small apartment suddenly feeling closer, more confining. He had spent his life in vast, empty rooms filled with expensive art and cold, gleaming surfaces. But here, in this modest space, was something more valuable than anything he had ever owned: the truth. "I was so blind," the millionaire said, his voice barely audible. I've spent my whole life chasing after things, money, power, success. I thought that if I had enough, none of the rest would matter. But it does. It matters more than anything. The janitor nodded but said nothing. His silence was not accusatory, but patient. He was waiting, giving the millionaire the space to come to his own realizations. I fired you, the millionaire continued, his voice breaking slightly. I didn't even think twice about it. You've been in my house for years, and I never once saw you. This time the janitor smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in his eyes. You were always looking, but you weren't seeing. That's the problem with people who think money is the answer to everything. It blinds you to the things that really matter. The words stung not because they were harsh, but because they were true. The millionaire had spent his life building walls of wealth, walls of status, walls of emotional distance. And now, sitting here, he realized how isolated those walls had made him. He thought of the people in his life, his business associates, his family, even the other staff members in the mansion. All of them existed in his world, but none of them were truly a part of it. He had surrounded himself with people, but had no meaningful connections with any of them. Not even with the one person who had loved him most, his mother. The janitor's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but firm. Your mother didn't want you to lose yourself. She knew the path you were on, and she wanted to save you from it. That's why she gave me the ring. She knew I would keep it safe until you were ready to see beyond the surface. The millionaire's chest tightened with emotion. He had never understood his mother's quiet wisdom, her gentle way of guiding him without forcing her will upon him. Now, in her absence, he finally saw what she had been trying to do all along. The loss of the ring had been a wake-up call, but the real loss had been something much deeper. His own sense of purpose, his ability to connect with the people around him. And now, as he sat across from the janitor, he realized that his journey wasn't about retrieving a missing object. It was about finding a way back to himself. I don't know how to fix this, the millionaire said, his voice filled with vulnerability. I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt people, pushed them away. I don't even know where to begin. The janitor regarded him quietly for a moment before responding. You begin by seeing, by really seeing, not just the wealth, the status, or the power, but the people, the relationships, the things that make life worth living. Your mother wanted you to find your way back to that. The millionaire's eyes filled with tears, a rush of emotions he hadn't felt in years. The cold, hard shell he had built around himself was cracking, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel. Thank you, he whispered, the words heavy with the weight of his gratitude. The janitor nodded once more, as if understanding the unspoken meaning behind those words. This was not just a thank you for keeping the ring safe. It was a thank you for seeing the man behind the wealth, for understanding him in a way that no one else had. As the millionaire stood to leave, he reached for the ring on the table, but the janitor's hand gently stopped him. Not yet, he said softly. You're close, but not yet. When you're truly ready, you'll know. The millionaire paused, then slowly withdrew his hand. He nodded, realizing that the journey was not yet complete. The ring was more than a possession. It was a symbol of everything he had to rediscover. And while he had taken the first steps toward understanding, there was still much further to go. As he left the janitor's apartment and stepped back into the cool night air, the weight of his mother's words and the janitor's wisdom echoed in his mind. For the first time in his life, the millionaire felt truly uncertain about his future. But for the first time, he also felt something else. Hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was one he was finally ready to walk. The ring, his mother's legacy, was waiting for him at the end of that journey. And when he was truly ready, when he had found his way back to the values she had cherished, it would be his once again. For now, he would keep moving forward, one step at a time. The millionaire drove through the dark, quiet streets, the weight of his conversation with the janitor heavy on his mind. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as his thoughts raced. He had always been a man of action. Problems were solved with quick decisions, deals closed with sharp, calculated moves. But now, for the first time, he faced something he couldn't just fix. The mystery of his mother's final days, her decision to entrust the janitor with the ring, and the deeper meaning behind it all haunted him. The city lights blurred past as he drove, but his mind remained in the dimly lit apartment with the janitor. His mother had trusted a stranger, someone he had always considered beneath notice, with something so deeply personal. It stung. How could she not have confided in him instead? What did the janitor know that he didn't? The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed answers. Not just about the ring, but about his mother's relationship with the janitor. There was something there, something more than simple trust. But what? The next morning, he made a decision. He would investigate. With the same determination that had made him one of the most successful men in the city, he set out to learn everything he could about the janitor and his connection to his mother. It didn't take long to gather some background information. After all, money opened doors and loosened tongues. The janitor, it turned out, wasn't just a random hire. He had come to the mansion shortly after his mother had fallen ill. His history was vague, but there were clues that suggested he had known the millionaire's mother long before he ever worked for the family. This revelation sent a chill down the millionaire's spine. Why had he never known? Why had his mother kept this a secret? He dove deeper, contacting old acquaintances of his mother, searching through family records, and even hiring a private investigator to look into the janitor's past. What he uncovered was both shocking and confusing. The janitor had once been a man of means himself, someone who had fallen on hard times after a series of personal tragedies. His life had unraveled, leading him to take on humble jobs just to make ends meet. But years ago, before his fall from grace, he had been close friends with the millionaire's mother. They had known each other in their youth, an unspoken bond that had somehow endured through the years. The millionaire sat in his office, staring at the file in front of him. The pictures of the janitor, much younger, standing beside his mother at various events, told a story he had never imagined. There had been a history between them, a history his mother had chosen not to share with him. But why? As he flipped through the pages, something else caught his eye. A letter, written in his mother's hand, addressed to the janitor but never sent. In it she spoke of her failing health, of her regrets, and of her hope that her son would one day find his way back to the values she had always cherished. But it was the last line that sent a shock through him. I trust you to guide him, to show him what I could not. His breath caught in his throat. His mother had relied on the janitor not just to safeguard the ring, but to guide him, her own son, back to the person she had hoped he would become. It was as if she had known, long before her death, that the path he was on would lead him astray. She had entrusted someone else, someone she trusted deeply, to step in where she could not. But why had she never told him any of this? Why had she kept the janitor's presence in her life a secret? The questions circled in his mind, but there were no easy answers. His mother had been a deeply private person, someone who valued her relationships quietly and without fanfare. And yet, the idea that she had hidden something so important from him felt like a betrayal. He thought back to the janitor's words, to the way he had spoken about his mother with such reverence and care. It wasn't anger or resentment that filled the millionaire now. It was something much harder to face. It was shame. Shame for having been so blind, so caught up in his own world, that he had missed the quiet wisdom his mother had tried to impart on him throughout his life. And now, the man he had fired, the man he had dismissed so easily, held the key to understanding not only his mother's final wishes, but the path to his own redemption. The millionaire's mind churned with these revelations. He had thought that retrieving the ring would somehow bring closure, but instead, it had only opened up more questions. Questions about his mother's life, her choices, and his own place in the world. That night, unable to sleep, he paced the halls of his mansion, the vast empty rooms feeling more like a prison than ever before. For so long, he had believed that his wealth would protect him, that his success would fill the void left by his mother's death. But now, with each new discovery, he realized how hollow those beliefs had been. The next day, he returned to the janitor's apartment, but this time he came not as a man seeking answers, but as someone willing to listen. When the janitor opened the door, there was no surprise in his eyes, just a quiet acceptance, as if he had been expecting this moment. "I found out about your history with my mother," the millionaire said, stepping inside. "I didn't know. I had no idea." The janitor nodded, motioning for him to sit down. "She didn't want you to. She didn't think it was something you were ready to hear." The millionaire swallowed hard. "I understand now, or at least I'm starting to. She trusted you with more than just the ring. She trusted you to guide me." For a long moment, the janitor said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Your mother knew you better than anyone else. She saw things in you that you didn't see in yourself. That's why she asked me to step in when she couldn't. Not to take her place, but to be a reminder of the things she wanted you to hold on to." The millionaire looked down, the weight of those words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had spent so much time running from his past, from the values his mother had tried to teach him, and now he was being confronted with the one thing he had always avoided, the truth about himself. "I've been so lost," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "For so long, I've chased after the wrong things, and now I don't even know where to start." The janitor smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "You start by letting go of what you think you know. By opening your heart to what's really important. Your mother's love, her guidance, it's still here. It's in that ring. But it's also in you. You just have to let it in." The millionaire felt the tears well up in his eyes, but for the first time in years, he didn't fight them. He let them fall, letting the emotions he had buried for so long finally surface. In that moment, sitting in the small, humble apartment of the man he had once dismissed, the millionaire realized that the journey wasn't about finding the ring. It was about finding himself. The mystery of the janitor and his mother had led him here, to this moment of clarity. And as he looked at the janitor, he knew that his mother's faith in him had been well placed. The road ahead would be long, and there were still many unanswered questions. But for the first time in his life, the millionaire felt ready to face them. He wasn't just reclaiming a lost ring, he was reclaiming the man his mother had always believed he could be. The next few days felt like an eternity for the millionaire. Though he had taken his first steps toward redemption, the journey ahead was daunting. His world, once defined by wealth and success, had been stripped down to its core. He had been forced to confront truths about himself that he had long buried, and now he stood on the edge of a precipice. What came next would either mark his transformation or his descent into the emotional abyss he had long ignored. He spent hours in his office, staring at the ring in the photograph he had taken from the janitor's apartment, feeling the weight of its symbolism. His mother had seen him drift away, and she had trusted the janitor to remind him of the values he had abandoned. But how was he supposed to live up to her expectations? How could he reconcile the man he had become with the man she had hoped he would be? The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant, informing him that one of his major business deals was falling apart. Investors were backing out, and his company's financial stability was at risk. Normally, this news would have sent him into a panic, scrambling to protect his assets. But today, it felt distant, almost irrelevant. The urgency of the business world no longer seemed as pressing. What did all the money and power mean if he was still emotionally bankrupt? But the crisis couldn't be ignored. He had spent his entire life building his empire, and now, in this moment of personal reckoning, it was all teetering on the brink of collapse. His business partners, people who once stood beside him with confidence, were now questioning his leadership. The pressure was mounting, and the millionaire found himself pulled in two directions. He knew he had to face the financial turmoil, but he also knew that if he didn't continue his journey of self-reflection, he would lose something far more important than money. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he reached out to the janitor once again. This time, it wasn't just to understand his mother's intentions, but to seek guidance in navigating his own inner turmoil. When they met, the janitor listened patiently as the millionaire poured out his frustrations. The weight of his business, the unraveling of his personal life, and the constant struggle to maintain control, he laid it all bare. The millionaire was a man used to fixing problems with cold, calculated decisions, but none of his usual strategies were working now. I've built this life, the millionaire said, his voice raw with emotion. I've built it from nothing, and now it's falling apart. I don't know how to stop it. The janitor, as always, spoke with a calmness that seemed to cut through the chaos. Maybe it's not about stopping it. Maybe it's about letting go of what you think you need to hold on to. The words hit the millionaire like a punch to the gut. Letting go. He had spent his entire life clinging to control, to power, to the belief that his wealth defined him. But now, in the face of everything falling apart, he was beginning to understand that it wasn't about holding on, it was about releasing the things that no longer served him. But if I let go, he said quietly, what's left? The janitor smiled gently. What's left is what really matters. Your mother knew that. She didn't leave you the ring to remind you of your success. She left it to remind you of who you are, beyond all of this. The millionaire sat in silence, the truth of the janitor's words settling over him. He had been chasing wealth, success, and power for so long that he had forgotten who he was beneath it all. He had built his identity around external achievements, but now those achievements were crumbling, leaving him exposed. And then, as if on cue, a memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought of in years. It was a memory of his mother, sitting with him in the garden on a quiet afternoon, long before the mansion had been filled with the trappings of wealth. She had been teaching him how to plant flowers, her hands covered in dirt, her face lit with a gentle smile. You can't force them to grow, she had said, her voice full of the wisdom he hadn't appreciated at the time. You just have to give them what they need and let nature take its course. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to step back and let things happen. Her words echoed in his mind now, as he realized how far he had strayed from that simple truth. He had spent years trying to force everything in his life to grow, his business, his wealth, his influence. But in doing so, he had suffocated the parts of himself that truly mattered. The memory brought with it a deep sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked up at the janitor, his eyes filled with gratitude. I think I understand now, he said, his voice steady. It's not about the ring, it's about everything it represents. My mother wanted me to remember what's important, not the money, not the success, but the person I am beneath all of it. The janitor nodded. She always believed you would find your way back. With that realization, the millionaire knew what he had to do. The next few days were spent restructuring his business, but this time his decisions were different. Instead of focusing solely on profit and control, he began to delegate, trusting others to take on responsibilities that he had always kept tightly in his grip. He reached out to old friends and colleagues, repairing relationships that had been strained by years of neglect. And most importantly, he began to reconnect with the values his mother had instilled in him long ago. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when he questioned whether he was doing the right thing. But each time those doubts crept in, he thought of his mother's words, the ring, and the janitor's quiet wisdom. He was learning to let go, to trust in the process, and to allow himself to grow in ways he had never imagined. Finally, after weeks of reflection and personal growth, the millionaire returned to the janitor's apartment. This time, he didn't come seeking answers. He came to offer something more valuable. As they sat across from each other, the millionaire took a deep breath and reached into his pocket. He pulled out the small velvet box that had once held his mother's wedding ring. It was empty now, a symbol of the journey he had undertaken. I think I'm ready, he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. The janitor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out the ring, placing it gently in the millionaire's hand. You've always been ready, the janitor said softly. You just needed to see it. The millionaire held the ring in his hand, feeling its weight and the history it carried. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything his mother had believed in, everything she had wanted for him. And now, after all these years, he finally understood. As he slipped the ring onto his finger, a sense of peace washed over him. The journey wasn't over, but he had taken the first step. He had found his way back to the person his mother had always known he could be. And in that moment, sitting in the humble apartment of the man who had guided him through his darkest times, the millionaire felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt whole. The weight of the past had lifted, and in its place was a sense of hope, of possibility, of a future that wasn't defined by wealth or power, but by the things that truly mattered: love, connection, and the quiet wisdom of a mother's legacy. The millionaire stood, thanked the janitor one last time, and walked out into the crisp evening air. He looked down at the ring on his finger and smiled. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. The sun had already dipped below the horizon by the time the millionaire left the janitor's apartment. The cool evening breeze brushed against his face as he walked down the quiet street, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had the ring back, but more importantly, he had regained something much more profound: his sense of self, his connection to the values that truly mattered, and a renewed understanding of his mother's enduring love. He walked slowly, his thoughts swirling around the final pieces of the puzzle: his mother's wisdom, the janitor's quiet guidance, and the journey that had led him to this moment, all settled into place, forming a clear picture of what he needed to do next. The ring, resting comfortably on his finger, now served as a reminder of his mother's belief in him and the path he needed to follow. When he arrived back at the mansion, the grand estate felt different. The walls, once oppressive and cold, seemed less imposing, as if they had softened in response to his inner transformation. He entered his study, where so much of his previous life had unfolded: deals made, fortunes built, but relationships neglected. The room, filled with relics of his past ambition, no longer held the same allure. The wealth, the power, the status, they all seemed insignificant compared to the emotional wealth he had rediscovered. He sat down at his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. For the first time in years, he felt compelled to write, not a business memo or a contract, but something personal. Something from the heart. He thought of his mother, of the lessons she had tried to teach him, and of the journey he had just undergone. And so he began to write a letter, as if he were speaking to her. Dear Mother, I've spent so long lost in a world of my own making, chasing after things that I thought would bring me happiness. But now I see what you always knew, that happiness doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from love, from connection, from being true to oneself. You trusted me with your legacy, but more than that, you trusted me to find my way back. And though it took longer than I'd like to admit, I finally made it. The ring you gave me was never just a symbol of your love for Father. It was a reminder of the values you wanted me to hold on to. Values that I've lost, and thanks to you, have found again. I've realized that life isn't about holding on to control, but about letting go of the things that no longer serve us. I've let go of the need to define myself by my success, and I've embraced the truth of who I am, the son you always believed in. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'm ready to face it with an open heart. Thank you, Mother, for never giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself. With love, always your son. He placed the letter in the drawer of his desk, next to the small, empty velvet box that had once held his mother's ring. It wasn't meant to be sent. His mother was gone after all, but it was a way to honor her, to acknowledge her faith in him, and to mark the start of his new path. In the days that followed, the millionaire took steps that shocked many of the people in his life. He began dismantling parts of his empire, selling off assets that no longer aligned with his vision. But instead of hoarding the money, he started to give it away, donating to causes that reflected the values his mother had lived by: education, community development, support for families in need. It was a radical shift, and his business associates were bewildered, some even furious, by his sudden change in direction. But the millionaire no longer cared about their opinions. For the first time in years, he was making decisions not based on what others expected of him, but on what felt right in his heart. He also sought out the people he had wronged or neglected during his years of blind ambition. He met with his family, opening up in ways he had never done before, acknowledging the emotional distance he had maintained, and apologizing for it. He reconnected with old friends, people who had once been close to him before his drive for success had pushed them away. And in each of these interactions, he felt the same thing: a sense of healing, of reconnection, of rediscovering the parts of life that truly mattered. The janitor, though still working quietly in his modest job, remained an important presence in the millionaire's life. They continued to meet, though now their conversations were less about the past and more about the future. The janitor had become more than just a guide. He had become a friend, someone who had seen the millionaire at his worst and had still believed in his potential for change. One day, as they sat together in the garden of the mansion, the millionaire turned to the janitor with a question that had been on his mind for some time. "My mother trusted you with so much," he said, his voice thoughtful. "You helped her. You helped me. But why did you stay? After all I did to you, why didn't you just leave and forget about us?" The janitor smiled gently, his eyes warm with understanding. "Your mother believed in you, and I believed in her. She saw the goodness in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. I stayed because I knew she was right. You just needed time." The millionaire nodded, deeply moved. He realized now that his mother had always been guiding him, even from beyond the grave. She had set everything in motion, trusting that he would one day come to understand the truth about himself. And now he had. Months later, the mansion had transformed. It was no longer the cold, lifeless fortress it had once been. Instead, it was filled with life, with people who shared the millionaire's vision of giving back and creating positive change. His wealth, which had once been a source of isolation, had become a tool for connection, a means of making the world better for those who needed it most. The millionaire himself had changed too. No longer burdened by the need to control everything, he moved through life with a sense of calm and purpose. The ring on his finger had become a quiet reminder of the journey he had taken, and of the love and guidance that had brought him back to his true self. One evening, as he stood in the garden, looking out over the peaceful grounds, he thought of his mother. He imagined her sitting beside him, as she had in that long-ago memory, her hands working the soil, her voice filled with the same gentle wisdom that had guided him through life. "You did it, Mother," he whispered into the quiet. "You brought me home." The air around him felt warm, as if her presence was still there, watching over him, proud of the man he had become. And in that moment, the millionaire knew that he had found his way back, not just to the values his mother had taught him, but to the person he was always meant to be. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought him to a place of peace, of love, and of hope. As he slipped the ring off his finger and placed it gently in the palm of his hand, he smiled. The journey had come full circle, and though the mystery of the past had been solved, the future stretched out before him, filled with endless possibilities. The millionaire closed his hand around the ring, holding it close to his heart, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace.